Science has given us miracles, but also nightmares. From scientists messing with your memory to radioactive oatmeal fed to disabled children. And then there was the scientist who ate vomit, just to see what would happen. This isn't science fiction. These horrors were actually carried out on human guinea pigs. On today's episode of the Infographics Show, we're revealing the most terrifying experiments that actually happened. Number 10. The Lost in the Mall experiment was the brainchild of Dr. Elizabeth Loftus. A teenage boy was taken into a private room and given 4 recorded accounts of things that had happened to him in childhood, all generously provided by family members who were also taking part in the test. The objective was simple. If he didn't remember any of these memories, he just had to write, "I do not remember this," underneath. But if he did, Dr. Loftus would press him for the details, digging deeper into the story. The teen boy could, in fact, remember all the events, but one was particularly vivid: the memory of being lost in a shopping mall when he was young. As he recounted the details to Dr. Loftus, he even felt a pang of anxiety returning, the feeling that he'd be lost forever and he would never see his family again. He recalled the whole thing with perfect clarity, which is really impressive, considering it never actually happened. Loftus had just shown that entire memories could be planted in the human mind. Great news for any budding evil genius manipulators out there. And she didn't need to use magic or sophisticated mind control machines. All she needed was enough authentic details to make a memory seem real. And then the mind did the rest. Every one of the 24 participants was given the same Lost in the Mall story, but with the help of their families, Loftus laced each version with personal details, making the fake memory feel disturbingly real. While it's by no means a perfect technique, it did have 7 of the 24 subjects recalling in vivid detail a memory that never occurred. Loftus never set out to use this for harm. Her goal was to prove that false memories could be implanted. That's just one way for scientists to mess around with your brain. And at least unlike our next item, it doesn't involve lurking around sleeping children. Number 9. It's 1942, and you're a kid growing up in the US. Lucky for you, you're too young for the draft. So no dodging bullets in the Pacific Theater or being shelled in Berlin. Life is pretty normal, except for one problem: you can't stop chewing your nails. No matter how much your parents nag, you keep chomping away. But if that's your biggest worry, you're doing fine, right? And with summer camp on the horizon, things are looking even better. Baseball, tennis, marshmallows, no parents, no lectures. It's the best summer of your life, and you hope it never ends. But the time it does end and you realize something amazing. You've stopped biting your nails. It's a miracle, and it's all thanks to that creepy voice that whispers to you 300 times every night. The whole scenario was a part of the utterly bizarre experiment by Professor Lawrence LeSean of William and Mary College to prove the then popular story of sleep learning. You know, those YouTube subliminal videos that tell you that they can make you everything from smarter to buff just by playing them while you're asleep? That's basically an even more out there evolution of sleep learning. Professor LeSean thought that trying to cure a bunch of young boys of their nasty nail-biting habit would be a perfect way to prove the theory was legit, and he did it in the creepiest way possible. Once the boys were asleep in their camp bunks, LeSean would play a phonograph record that said, "My fingernails taste terribly bitter," on a loop 300 times. His hope was that this would insert the idea into the boys' minds, and the idea of chewing on their bitter nails would feel uninviting. By the time the 54-night experiment was over, they had heard the cue over 16,000 times, but it didn't seem to have that much of an effect. Then the phonograph broke. Did this put the kibosh on the experiment? Nope. LeSean took matters into his own hands. He would sneak into the room at night and personally whisper, "My fingernails taste terribly bitter." He did this hundreds of times right into the ear of the sleeping child, a method that would have been pure nightmare fuel to any of them if they had woken up. By the time it was over, LeSean declared the experiment a success, but these results really haven't stood the test of time. These days, most respected scientists agree that sleep learning as a theory doesn't really hold much water. And honestly, any experiment that requires a grown man to sneak into a room full of young boys at night to whisper in their ears is probably an area of knowledge best left unstudied. Still, finding out whether sleep learning is a legit way to stop kids from biting their fingernails is pretty low stakes. But what kind of experiment would you need to conduct to see how soldiers act when they're about to die? Number 8. In the 1960s, scientists Mitchell Birkin, Hilton Bialik, Richard Kern, and Ken Yagi came up with the chilling phrase, "the experimental arousal of fear of death." Their mission was to find out how well American soldiers performed when gripped by mortal terror. After all, soldiers are faced with life or death situations, and you can't have an effective army if they're all crumbling under pressure. But how do you test the soldiers in a situation where they believe they might die? Easy. You trick them into thinking they're about to die, and then you see how they perform under that terror, and the research team seemingly had a lot of fun creating these seemingly deadly tests. In the first, a group of soldiers boarded what seemed like a routine passenger flight, but the calm trip quickly turned into something straight out of Final Destination. Midway through the flight, the pilot said over the comms that the engine was failing and they were going down. As they approached the nearby military base, where fire trucks were already gathering, the pilot then told the soldiers the landing gear had somehow malfunctioned too. And if all of this wasn't stressful enough, now the soldiers needed to do some paperwork. This was the test part of the experiment. An air stewardess went down the aisle handing out insurance forms. She explained that if the plane crashed and everyone died in a flaming heap, the army would be covered. It was vital that they read them carefully and then fill them out correctly. But here's the catch hiding inside of the catch. The forms were purposefully badly written, with dense legalese and deliberately confusing. And even in normal circumstances, it was unreadable. Never mind when you were convinced your last screams were about to be committed to a black box. Once all these forms were filled in, a voice over the intercom said, "This is your captain speaking. Just kidding about the emergency." At a certain point, it really just becomes an exercise in rubbing salt in the wound. And that wasn't even the only test like this the team performed on the unfortunate recruits at Hunter Liggett Military Reservation. In another one of the several nightmarish death tests, some unknown soldiers were trapped in a small outpost and convinced that they were actively being shelled. There were even convincing explosions nearby, and while being bombarded, they needed to try to rewrite their communications radio from nonsensical instructions to a call for evacuation. There was at least some positive outcome from this, even if it probably did make a bunch of soldiers regret enlisting. The scientists found that the experience and education were the biggest factors in soldiers being able to stay calm during life-threatening situations. But honestly, we probably could have told you that without nearly giving a bunch of Army cadets coronaries. All of this is pretty morally horrifying, but it is nowhere near as viscerally repulsive as our next entry. Seriously, you might lose your lunch listening to this, but then you need to worry about number 7. In a list of terrifying human experiments, this one feels like something out of a horror movie, but not a mainstream one that you'd see in the theaters. It's the kind of weird, freaky nightmare that you would find on the last page of a cursed streaming service and never manage to forget. And like all great horror movies, it's got an extremely memorable main character, Dr. Stubbins Firth. Firth was a physician in the late 1700s and early 1800s who got most of his work treating victims of yellow fever, an extremely painful and dangerous virus that seemed to pop up during the summer months. He also thought it was pretty strange that despite all of his time spent in close proximity to the patients, he never caught the virus himself. Maybe Firth thought this disease wasn't contagious at all. Maybe it was a disease of excitement caused by personal feelings and non-communicable between humans. If he could just prove this theory, then he could revolutionize the treatment for this horrible disease and improve countless lives in the process. But to make this happen, he needed to perform some experiments. And this is where things started to get unholy. One of the key characteristics of yellow fever is chunky black vomit, caused by bleeding in the gastrointestinal tract that seeps into the contents of the stomach. Despite being utterly vile, if Firth's theories were true, then the vomit would be harmless. You can see where this is going, right? Firth tested the theory by soaking bread in yellow fever vomit from his patients and then feeding it to a dog. Not only was the dog unharmed over the 3-day experiment, but it actually started to like the taste. And with the animal trial out of the way, it was time to move on to human testing, and since Firth was allegedly human, he figured he'd make the perfect test subject. First, he started by having incisions made into the skin of his arms and then pouring yellow fever puke into the wounds. Astonishingly, no effect, and this only encouraged him to get grosser. He smeared the black vomit into gaping wounds, other times he splashed it into his eyes, and when he wanted more, he boiled the stuff and he huffed the fumes, like some kind of horrifying barf bong. He even made himself a yellow fever puke sauna by filling a room with boiled vomit fumes, which probably smelled like hell itself, but it still didn't give Firth yellow fever. And so sadly, the experiments continued. He started making pills out of the vomit and swallowing them, and then he got his mixology on, mixing it into water and alcohol to drink. When he'd worked up sufficient courage, he even started eating the vomit, all to prove his point that yellow fever wasn't contagious at all, and really, it was just a disease of excitement. Except, he was wrong. Yellow fever is contagious, and it's transmitted most often through the bites of infected mosquitoes that are most active during the warmer times of year. As for why he never got sick, most doctors agree these days that a lot of it was just luck. If he'd picked a more virulent virus like smallpox, he would have been dead real quick. So, not only is the good doctor's test utterly repulsive, it was utterly pointless too. This is the kind of thing that might make you fear doctors. Speaking of experiments that might make you fear something. Number 6. Prepare to meet a real-life supervillain. Dr. John Broadus Watson. He's considered by many to be one of the fathers of the behaviorist movement of psychology, but also, as you'll soon find out, a massive sadistic creep. And we can't think of any experiment more horrifying than Little Albert, which Watson conducted back in 1919. Watson, a Johns Hopkins psychologist, and his student assistant Rosalie Rayner believed they could demonstrate something terrifying, that through conditioning a person's entire emotional development could be engineered from scratch. And that's where Little Albert came in. He was a bit of a plain kid. He didn't have any severe emotional reactions to anything, and he appeared on the whole pretty fearless. Watson thought that he could change that and make Albert terrified of a little white rat. The experiment was simple. A rat would be placed next to Albert, and at Rayner's insistence, he would reach out and try to touch it. Then Watson would slam a hammer down on a metal bar, making a frightening noise. They did this again and again until little Albert learned to associate the rat with the scary noise. And from then on, he would burst into tears whenever he saw the rat, despite not being afraid of it at first. Watson and Rayner considered this a win. Albert's mother did not, because the second she found out exactly what had happened, she withdrew him from the experiment and left immediately. We think it's safe to say that this man should never have been allowed to perform experiments featuring children. While we don't know what happened to little Albert after the experiment, he did in a sense get the last laugh. The highly unethical studies got Watson effectively chased out of town in the scientific community, and he spent the rest of his life working in the classic sleazeball industry of advertising. He hoped that he could reapply his theories about shaping human behavior to make them buy poor quality products. It's safe to say that all this caused a lot of stress for poor little Albert, but that is nothing compared to the unfortunate kids at the center of our next experiment. Number 5. Founded in 1848, the Walter E. Fernald Development Center was once famous as the oldest care facility for people with developmental disabilities in the Western Hemisphere. But scientific studies into radiation in the 20th century were about to alter the legacy of this once admirable institution in the worst possible way. Between 1946 and 1953, the facility, in collaboration with researchers at MIT, started a new science club that the boys at the school could get involved with. It seemed like a pretty good deal, from getting larger meal portions to getting to attend Boston Red Sox games now and then. For kids that were looked down upon intellectually in the even more ableist hellscape of the 40s and 50s, it was a great opportunity to get involved in the exciting world of science. The thing is, while these kids certainly were getting involved in science, it wasn't as junior scientists, it was as human guinea pigs in a series of broader experiments. The experiment's most nightmarish twist came at breakfast. Radioactive isotopes were hidden in the Quaker oats given to the 74 children. Once the samples were consumed, the MIT researchers would closely study the health and behavior of the boys, as well as later analyzing their blood and stool samples. You've probably guessed by now that neither the kids nor the parents gave proper informed consent to be involved in this experiment. But when you're doing all of this already, crossing that ethical line is probably just par for the course. When the wholesome Quaker Oats company discovered their oatmeal was being used to dose disabled kids with radiation, they were outraged and demanded consequences. Just kidding, they actually helped sponsor the whole experiment. Maybe they were considering whether they should add radioactive iron and calcium as exciting new flavors. And for some reason, cereal manufacturing just attracts a certain breed of ethically dubious weirdo. John Harvey Kellogg, one of the founders of the Kellogg Cereal Company, was a radical anti-masturbation activist. He believed that his bland cereal might stop the rising tide of sexual degeneracy in America. One of his most horrifying ideas was suggesting that they should sew up the foreskins of young men to prevent them from spilling their seed outside of married conception. Yet, somehow, he still seems like the good guy when compared to the atrocities going on at Fernald. Knowing all this happened and was sponsored by the world's most boring and harmless-seeming oatmeal company is enough to give you nightmares. But the scientists in our next experiment took a far more direct approach. Number 4. If some psychologists say that they'll give you some free movie screenings if you help them out with a little experiment, it's time to turn and run away as fast as you possibly can, screaming and waving your arms around too if it helps. That's some advice that a number of unsuspecting blue-collar Americans probably wish they followed back in 1965 when Herman Witkin and Helen Lewis recruited them for a sleep study. Their question was a pretty simple one. If you experienced an emotionally charged event while you were asleep, would this event have a direct and measurable influence on the content of your dreams? Most psychologists even today agree that dreams are a pretty uncharted territory. There are a number of theories around what they are and what psychological and biological purpose they serve. So anything that gives us a sense of what's going on in dreamland is surely going to be valuable information, right? Well, we'll get back to that later. Witkin and Lewis figured the perfect test would be to take a bunch of average Joes and subject them to the most unpleasant watch party ever. They prepared 3 different emotionally charged pieces of footage that would act as a tracer element in their dreams, something with very specific and defined imagery that you would notice if it popped up. The first film was an Aboriginal tribal ritual involving a sharp piece of flint, a penis, and some fire, and we'll leave the rest to your imagination. The second was incredibly graphic footage of a woman giving birth with some extreme close-ups on all the sticky parts. And the third involved a monkey and her baby, and we're just gonna say that if you watched it, you definitely wouldn't forget it. After this collection of horrors, the subjects would be made to sleep in the lab. The researchers would wake them up and ask them to describe their dreams in a stream of consciousness fashion, recording any of these salient details for later. If their theory was correct, then images and motifs from the traumatic video footage would be popping up all over their dreams. And here's where things get kind of complicated. If you asked Witkin and Lewis, they would tell you their exercise in terraforming the nightmares of their test subjects was a great success. But when you actually look at the results, you start to see that they're maybe not quite as promising as they're making out, depending on your perspective. The recurring imagery that Witkin and Lewis pointed out was heavily metaphorical, like, for example, one of the test subjects dreamed about a gun, which the researchers took as a clear metaphorical symbol for the penis, as depicted in the Aboriginal ritual. Another dream featured someone removing a chicken from a brown paper bag. This, according to the researchers, was a clear metaphor for the birthing process as depicted in the second film. In short, it really doesn't seem like all that much of a stretch to say that confirmation bias might have been a little at play here, and our science-powered duo probably also felt a pretty strong need to show some results to justify subjecting all those poor subjects to such horrifying footage. Still, whether all this worked or not, there is something undeniably frightening about a pair of researchers trying to fill your brain with nightmare juice. But we can think of something worse: a scientist making you choose to kill an innocent stranger. Number 3. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted one of the most controversial and disturbing experiments of all time. But what can you expect when it was literally inspired by the Nazis? Milgram claimed that he got the idea for the study from the trial of Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the Holocaust. Eichmann, for all the evil he'd been involved in, seemed like such a boring, unremarkable little man. He was the literal inspiration for the term "the banality of evil," coined by Jewish journalist Hannah Arendt. However, what fascinated Milgram most, even when Eichmann was faced with definite execution no matter what he said, he still had no trouble avoiding responsibility for his crimes. He was just following orders, just taking direction from the top. Milgram wondered if someone could be convinced to do something they knew was evil, so long as an authority figure told them it was okay. So began the electric shock test. Milgram had 2 test subjects, a person asking questions and another person wired up to an electric shock machine. A lab coat-wearing scientist in attendance would direct the questioner to do their thing. Every time the other subject got a question wrong, the scientist instructed the questioner to give the other subject an electric shock. And with each question, the shock got even more severe, until they started to become life-threatening. And even when they protested, knowing they were hurting the other subject, the questioner almost always followed the orders of the authoritative scientist and upped the voltage. If anything happened, it would all be the scientist's responsibility. The big twist is that the questioner was the only real test subject. The person getting shocked was a paid actor who just pretended to get shocked every time. The real test was to see how much pain an ordinary person would inflict simply because someone in authority told them to. But at least in this experiment, nobody actually got physically hurt. Sadly, the same is very much not true for the remaining 2 experiments on our list. Number 2. Nuclear weapons were responsible for 2 of the deadliest atrocities of the 20th century, and even when they weren't dropped on cities, they left behind unspeakable horrors. And US military scientists decided to make experimental lemonade out of those irradiated lemons. In 1954, the US launched the largest nuclear weapons test ever, Castle Bravo at Bikini Atoll in the Marshall Islands. This was an extremely high-yield detonation that spread radioactive material all over the vicinity, including over a lot of territory occupied by indigenous Marshallese people, who had no say in the US military exploding nuclear weapons on their doorstep. But the US never lets a good atrocity go to waste. So began Project 4.1. It was a highly classified experiment meant to study the effects of the radiation dosage on the islanders without them ever knowing what was happening. Officials knew exactly how horrific it was, even then. In a memo, project leader Eugene P. Cronkite of the National Naval Medical Center warned that no one should discuss the tests, except with those who had a strict need to know. At least 239 Marshallese were given a significant dose of radiation, resulting in everything from hair loss to, quote, raw weeping lesions as radiation sickness set in. Project 4.1 is a completely unforgivable nightmare that hurt hundreds of people. But somehow we think this next experiment is even more vile and terrifying. Number 1. South Africa has a bit of a checkered past. It's given us nightmares like apartheid, necklacing, and Elon Musk. But one of the lesser-known nightmares was an experimental cure for homosexuality in the South African Defense Force, described by Wikipedia as nothing less than a campaign of medical torture. To put it simply, the Aversion Project was an institutionalized conversion therapy program that treated being gay as a sickness. It took horrifying and extreme measures to try to weed it out among South Africa's soldiers. The first and most common method was one that would be right at home in a 1950s American mental institution: shock therapy. During the shock experiments, gay soldiers were made to look at black and white photos of naked men and told to have sexual fantasies about them. And the second they got aroused, a powerful electric shock would be administered, so gay thoughts would become associated with the pain of the shock. After these sessions, they'd be shown photos of naked women, this time in color, and encouraged to have unpunished sexual fantasies about them. And when that didn't work, and it definitely never worked because human sexuality isn't dictated by electric shocks, they went to far more severe methods. Chemical castration was one, essentially destroying the person's ability to ever have sexual relations. And there's evidence that they performed an even crazier method: involuntary sex reassignment surgery. That's right, seemingly operating entirely on insane troll logic, they figured if you can't stop a gay soldier from liking men, just turn him into a woman, and suddenly his attraction is perfectly straight. It's about as scientific as planting a sandwich to get a sandwich tree. But if this list has shown you anything, it's that being deranged and unscientific has never once actually stopped a crazy experiment. History is full of terrifying human experiments, but science itself has had some shocking disasters too. Check out science experiments that went horribly wrong, or click on this video instead.